Mike podcast, and a podcast years in the making.
Whew,
Literally years in the making. And I
years.
am so excited to talk to my guest today. We are recording this just hours after or a day after the big news in the UFC. This man does it all. He has a unique approach to the fight game. He's the one and only Blaine Henry. You can catch him on the Fight Library. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. And Blaine, finally happy to talk to you. We both have worked with My MMA News for quite some time, and it always felt like we were kept saying, "All right, let's do something. Let's do something." Here we are.
Man, look, we have like, hey, let's get on. Yeah, I'm gonna get on. Something comes up on your end. Hey, let's get on. All right, I'm gonna get on. Something's up on my end, man. Like it's been literally, you're not lying, years in the make. I've been with my MMA News for what, 4 or 5 years now?
Oh, yep.
Yeah, 5 years. So yeah, it's been a long time coming.
And honestly, what better way to have our first podcast together and introduce us? Because who knows, maybe this becomes a more regular thing. Talking about the most chaotic 24 hours in the UFC since I don't know in the past
Two two
year.
nine,
Yeah, yeah.
229. It's
I mean,
crazy.
this insane. Let's start with before we get to the UFC stuff. I want to start with what I said in the intro. You have such a unique way in which you cover combat sports. First and foremost, kind of give some insight into the listeners and viewers, just how you go about your coverage, what you cover exactly, and what led you into that.
So it's weird. A lot of the times I ask myself, like, why am I doing this? Like I have just this fever, like this itch to create stuff. And I've realized like I just like to make cool stuff. So there's points where I was writing for other websites and I'm chasing a dollar here and there. And I was like, you know what? I've got a good job at home. I don't need to do this. I literally do this for fun. Like this is just a blast. I like to make cool stuff. So I'm gonna make fun stuff. And guess what? It resonates with people when people realize like, hey, he really isn't trying to sell me anything. I mean, I'm trying to say to click, but that's about it, right? But like I like to create stuff. So like I do a lot of film study. I like guys like Miguel Class, Ghost on Twitter's fantastic. He's in the training camp with Zhang Wei Li and does her tape study. He's a good buddy of mine. Jack Slack's really good. Luke Thomas, like all these guys that have an analytical approach to it. It kind of feeds into my creativity because you're getting to see like I'm a creative person, but I'm getting to see how like say Chris Curtis deals with a pressure fighter when he goes hooks to the body, or how Max Holloway changes his approach from being a volume striker to a accuracy striker in his last couple fights with Allen and Gaethje. And like seeing this kind of makes my mind go crazy. I'm like, hey, this is really cool. So when I start to approach this, I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna say what I think is cool, and hopefully other people think it's cool. And some people think it's cool, some people don't. And I'm just having a blast making stuff.
I think that's what I've always envied about you. Number one, you make a lot of cool shit, man. You're number one. I didn't say it in the intro and I messed up. You are the king of YouTube thumbnails. You've been so kind to give me some advice there, so I appreciate that. But you make so much cool shit, and I've got to say, I think one reason why I've always been like, I need to talk to this guy is because you talk about it from an analytical standpoint, from a technical standpoint, right? All those things that you just mentioned. Meanwhile, I'm over here trying to have conversations like, let's say, with a Max Holloway, if he was ever on this show, to get inside the heart and the mind of a Max and be like, Max, why? When everything was there for you for the taking in the last 10 seconds, all you had to do was ease off the gas pedal. Why are you batshit crazy and swing out with Justin Gaethje? That, you could talk about it from a technical standpoint. I'd rather hear it from the mind and the heart. And I think that's what I love about having a conversation with you. I think people will be able to get it from two sides, of what truly makes a fighter. You talking more about obviously the greatness and their skill set, and me just what gets them out of bed and gets them to continue working on that craft. So big props to you, man. Honestly, was there a certain point in all that you were doing where you were like, this is the avenue I'm going to go, because the other stuff you were doing, maybe there just wasn't that gratification or satisfaction from it?
Look, I hated deadlines, and deadlines are important. Don't get me wrong. I hate deadlines. And like when I was doing some stuff for Sure Dog, they were paying well, but it was like I have to do a four diagram and analysis piece every week, twice a week for pre and post because I had a before and an aftermath series. I called them before math and aftermath, and it just got to be to where I was like, oh my gosh, this stinks. I don't want to write about Derek Lewis for the 14th main event in a row. Like it's just miserable. And I found myself, I got two small kids, and then I got a 12-year-old, and I found myself just burnt out at home. I'm like, you know what, dude? I'm just gonna make when I can make, and it's about getting in a rhythm and stuff. And I don't think there was a certain point to where I was like, I'm done. Every now and then I'd be like, I'll try something new. Like I do a weekly podcast or a weekly show on YouTube. I tried for years to do that, and I just didn't have the time. And I figured either A, I hate it, or B, the timing's wrong. And I always thought to myself, maybe the timing's just wrong. So I'll keep waiting. I'll try it again. And eventually I just got it to where like now I'm in a good groove with it. And once you get into that rhythm, you're like, okay, well, Sunday evening after like church, when I go to church, it's like, okay, after this, I'm going home talking about UFC because I've had time to think about it and think about what I've seen. And once you get into that rhythm, it's like, yeah, okay, let's keep going. Let's keep this rolling. Like once a month, I do a film study on a particular fighter. Hamzat kind of ruined me this month because I was doing one on him. We're still gonna drop that though because that's Hamzat, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just you got to stay into a rhythm, and there was no real point. I just find what I like to do and what I don't like to do. I really like making YouTube videos. It turns out.
Yeah, I need more tips on YouTube because I'm trying, but I do every I don't want to say at least once a week, maybe sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's 5 a week conversations with fighters, coaches, whomever, that's what I'm doing. But I see the reception that you're getting, not just on social media, but on YouTube. Has there ever been one interaction, maybe from a coach or a fighter that stands out the most to you to let you know, like, oh yeah, this is exactly why I'm doing it?
Chris Curtis gave me a shout out on Twitter one time. He mentioned me and Miguel Class in a thing. He's like, "There's these guys out here doing amazing analytical work, like Miguel Class and Blaine Henry." And I was like, "Wait, what? You're Chris Curtis, dude? You fight in the UFC? You're one of the longest reigning, like just a vet of the sport. You have fantastic striking, and you believe what I say." That like because I got imposter syndrome all the time. I'm like I don't know what I'm doing. I've never fought before. I don't do that. But like tape study is different from actually fighting. You can see stuff in tape study. Fighting's different because you're in the mentality that like the side that you like, the emotions, the mindset and stuff. Whereas like when I have somebody here that's like a really good technician like Chris Curtis telling me, hey, he's good, it's like, oh, okay, that's super cool. Like I was cheesing all day. My wife was laughing at me and stuff. It was so funny.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that really I kind of wanted you to hit at because I don't want to put myself in a class because I'm kind of like you, like imposter syndrome, right? So I don't want to put myself in a category that I probably don't belong in. But I do think there is a new wave of MMA journalism, if you even want to call it that, right? But MMA coverage, I'll say that that's better, right? Because I don't have a journalism degree and I never will. College was never my thing, but MMA coverage, right? And we have so many different types. We have the social media types. We have the clickbait types. We have people who think they can do this, but they just are truly a fan of the sport, and then they overstep their boundaries. So for anyone who wants to get it, and maybe we're talking combat sports right now, but maybe it translates over to a guy who loves the NBA and wants to kind of build a following by talking about his passion. What is the biggest advice you have for someone who wants to get into, like I said, whether it be combat sports or something else?
So like James Lynch does hockey now, which is really cool because I've watched James since he had like 5,000 followers on Twitter. So I look up to James Lynch like, man, this guy's the G, like the hustler of all hustlers. But if I'm giving advice, and I mean, I don't feel like I'm in a position to give advice, but you got first two things. First is consistency. You got to be consistent. Go, go, go. You have your thing. You got to post when people want to or know when you're going to post. Like everybody knows I'm going to post on a Sunday, a video on a Sunday, and I'm going to post it on Twitter on Monday or X, I should say, on Monday. You just got to be consistent with it, and it's not going to be good at first. It's not. You're going to be terrible at first. Your videos are going to be horrible. You're going to stutter. You're going to read scripts like this. If you do script stuff, you're not going to have all the pizzazz that you think you will. You got to learn like, hey, when you're giving energy to a video, give 110% instead of 100% because your 100% is actually like 80%. So it comes off as kind of not quite there. And you do a good job of that. Like you're very energetic and you bring a good, like, just style to it. And it's like, hey, you've got energy and this is actually got this guy loves what he does. And the second thing I would say is figure out what you are. And that sounds weird, but what I mean is I'm not a journalist. You said you're not a journalist either. You're a little bit more of a journalist than me, but what I feel like I am, and you probably feel the same way, is I'm not a journalist. I'm closer to Nina Drama than I am to Ariel Hawani. I'm a content creator. I make things. I make content and I hope people like them. And if they don't, no big deal. I had fun making, like, I did a video on Gaston Bolaños. Nobody knows who Gaston Bolaños is. Nobody cares. I liked it because he has really good spinning back elbows. And it comes in handy because I've got a little video on one of my YouTube channel premium memberships about Bruno Silva. I'm like, hey, Gaston Bolaños, I tried to tell you about this guy. So you got to figure out what you are. Do you want to be a journalist, go into these events covering and doing like these beats and breaking news? Because that's really cool. I've broken news before and it's cool. But I don't get as much fulfillment out of that as I do being at home with my family, watching as they're going to sleep. And then every now and then I'll go to an event and do one of my Fight Finder series where I'm talking about, oh, I'm going to be going into the history of bare knuckle in this episode. Let's talk about bare knuckle history on top of my boys at BYB and Ike Villanueva fighting for the title. So you got to decide what you are. You're a content creator. Are you like, you remember Michael Fidel? He worked for Bellator. Mac Tyson's in with Karate Combat. So you can go work for a promotion. If your aim is to work and do content for a promotion, fantastic. There's so many different avenues in all sports. And obviously, like NBA, NFL, MLB, that's going to be hard to get into. MMA is like a kind of a low barrier of entry. You can find, and I'm seeing a lot more people talk about boxing because that's even higher. So, like, once you get into upper echelon of MMA, you're like, okay, I want more. I want to do more stuff. Let's go to boxing because that's a lot harder to get into, and a lot more people talk about boxing.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate the compliment. For me, it's always been I don't really want to have a title of what I do. For me, I feel like the prototypical 30-year-old who gets made fun of on the internet because everyone's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, I don't want to take any kind of like arrogance or confidence in what I do. So people are like, so what is it that exactly that you're trying to do? I'm like, I don't know, man. You know how like Rogan just does podcasts and his guests, they just break down that wall and they're just vulnerable on the pod. That's all I want to do. I don't, listen, do I turn those video interviews into written articles and yes, the right headline gets the clicks? Yeah, but there's a difference in telling the story the right way and doing the clickbait stuff, right? You
Right.
you have been part of places that do clickbait. I've been part of places that do clickbait. We've seen people on social media do clickbait. I can't do that. When I walk into a room, if it's a press event, if it's a press conference, if it's a post-fight press conference, I want the fighters to go, "Oh, no, it's Mike. I could chill, because he's not the guy itching for a quote to go throw up, and then I've got to come back and be like, yo, that's not actually what I meant. There's no twisting words. It's just talk to me. I'm gonna let you tell your story, and I just look at myself as a platform. But I really think like, you were talking about just the level of entry for MMA. I wanted your thoughts on when people are trying to get into combat sports. Not only do you need to find, what it is you want to do and like you said, who you are, but there's a level to go about it, right? So how do you, Blaine, separate being a fan and covering? Because
I don't.
those are
It's so
but
bad.
there's a way to do it with
Yeah.
with being honest about it, right? Because
Yeah.
you could sit at the media, cage side, you could sit press row, but not jump out of your seat after every moment.
Right.
You can be in the moment, you can enjoy the action in front of you, but when you look like a fanboy who just got a better seat, that's where I kind of hate the coverage of combat sports.
Yeah. So there is separation. So a lot of my content comes from at home viewership. I do my one series called Fight Finders where I go in and look at these fights, and those usually have a subject. I've kind of changed like the anatomy of a fighter. And Fightville, you remember Fightville from
Yeah.
the Netflix with Frank? It's kind of an idea I had with those, but I want to go deeper. You'll see me post on like Twitter every day. I post a different style of martial art. That's kind of my study into that. But if you're separating, like a lot of my stuff is at home, so I'll go into these fights, and obviously it sucks because I have to pay attention to the most important fights from a viewing standpoint. And a lot of the fights I watch, like the prelim guys and stuff, I'm like, okay, I don't really have to take notes on this guy. I'm just going to enjoy this fight. I'm going to watch this and do it. And if I want to watch it again, I can go back and watch it because I got ESPN Plus, I got Fight Pass. But separating it is important because you don't want to be one of those guys that are like ride or die for one championship and now One Championship just is filing for bankruptcy because they took Sam Bankman-Fried money. You know, you don't want to do any of that because then you look like a fool. I know a lot of websites that really banked on putting their eggs in a basket like that, and next thing you know, they got the rug pulled from under them, and they're out now. Like, oh well, I have nothing. I worked towards this and I worked towards this as a fanboy, and I didn't put any good faith in anything else because I thought this was my ticket. You can't look at it as a ticket. You got to look at it as I'm making something. I'm covering something. I'm telling this story. I'm uncovering this story. That's what I do. You can't be like, oh, I'm a I don't want to like make it seem like I think less of anybody, but like I'm an Octagon guy. All I cover is Octagon. For all you know, Octagon could go under next week. You
Right.
know, or like King of the Streets, that bare knuckle MMA promotion from Florida, that from Poland, that fights on concrete.
Yeah.
They could be picked up by the authorities before their next event next month. You know,
Right,
you can't
right.
put all
Just
your eggs
because
in
they're
one
flying
basket.
into Poland doesn't mean, you're doing everything the right way. And to that point, and I don't like to really truly share a bunch of personal interactions that I've had on this, but to your point, right? I have said, and I think I make it very obvious, and I'm using him as an example because he fights next weekend. I think it's fairly obvious through some of the work I've done and my social media posts that when Jared Gordon fights, I can't cover him unbiasedly, right? I've had several interactions with Jared Gordon as man to man. I've had Jared pick up the phone when no one else would, and there's these things where you realize you're not just media and fighter. You're two people, you're two human beings. And I remember being out. So I have a very similar thought process as you. I will work, especially when I was still living in Chicago, I would work Monday through Friday, not only my regular job, but doing interviews, covering an event. And then on fight night, I'd be like, all right, I'm out. Someone else has got the results. I'm going out to the bar. I'm a fan tonight. And I will never forget the Patty Pimblett fight with Jared Gordon. And everyone's there for Patty. And then for everyone going back and forth during the fight, people who would kind of dog Jared during that fight, I'd go, come here for a second. Let me talk to you. Talk to him for 2 minutes. Tell him a little bit about Jared that you can easily find out online, his life story, right? And they're like, man, I'm a fan. And then after the fight, they're like, he got screwed. And I'm like, all right, like, you know what I mean? So that to me is where I know I have to take that hat off, right? Like, yeah, I definitely can cover without emotion or ties, but sometimes it's a little too hard. So you got to pull back, right? At some days you're not the guy doing interviews or making content, right? You're just a fan, but you have to know when to pull out and when to really, show up with some professionalism. Now, speaking of showing up, let's transition over to the big news this week. UFC 303. I mean, first, Robert Whitaker, Khamzat Chimaev. Khamzat is out, and I'm just going to start with this. And really, the biggest question I have is, I had buddies blowing me up going, dude, what is it about Khamzat? I don't think we're there yet, but could we be going down the dangerous road of Khamzat Chimaev being the next Sabit Magomedsharipov?
Zabit fought. Zabit fought a lot, especially early. He fought a little bit more than Hamzat, but he could end up being a what if. These things that are happening to him. He's had a horrible bout with COVID, that really sidelined him during the pandemic. Nobody knows really what this is except for probably those closest to him. But like that picture Guram Kutadaladze posted didn't look good. I mean, the thing about Hamzat is, man, he's so good, but he has a glaring hole, which is his gas tank. And a lot of people know where it would go eventually, or believe where it would go. Like, I believe where it could go eventually. But at the same time, you still want a guy not to be deathly sick. And B, you want to see Hamzat Chimaev, who's dedicated his life to fighting, live up to his full potential to see just how far he can go. Because, man, he seemed like the next big thing when he came out during it was Fight Island 1 that he made his UFC debut. He made it known that, I'm fighting 3 times in what was it, like 10 days or something like that. He fought like a Saturday, another Saturday, and a Wednesday.
Yep,
Like,
yep.
holy crap, this dude's incredible. And it's almost like the story of Icarus flying too close to the sun. He got so big, he got so many eyeballs on him, so much pressure, and these things happen to fighters. Like Dominic Cruz was out for several years with injury before he came back and took his title back. Hamzat might do that, but he's also going to have to shake that stigma because the sport's a lot bigger now than what it was when Dominic Cruz was the champion. He got a lot more popular than Dominic Cruz was at that time. There's not many people. I had people that don't even watch fighting. Like, hey, dude, tell me about Kamzat Chimaev. I'm like, yeah, he's special. Let's just hope he stays special. And the way he fights, like, it's incredible.
Yeah, I've never heard a crowd going crazy for cheering when the guy inside the octagon is yelling, "I'll kill everybody." You know, like you couldn't even hear him. The crowd was going so was erupting so loud for him. So that happens. What's happening at middleweight? Obviously, we know Dricus Du Plessis, Israel Adesanya. That's likely the next title fight. Sean Strickland coming off the win over Paulo Costa said he's just going to wait. I don't blame him, but I know that's a tricky situation. How many contenders are we seeing at the top of the middleweight division, in your opinion?
Man, I got to pull it up real quick because it
Yeah,
is it is really weird because middleweight's not traditionally a super thick division because you've got champions that reign for a long time. Think Anderson Silva and Israel Adesanya, and that thins out the division a little bit. And it's like, oh, who's Izzy going to fight next? You know, like remember, like it wasn't very highly thought that Sean Strickland was going to fight Israel Adesanya. Like nobody cared about that fight before Sean Strickland beat him. You know, so there's a lot going into this. So you got Dricus, who's the new champion, which brings a lot of fresh matchups for you. He can rematch Strickland because that was a close fight. Um, he's probably fighting Adesanya next because Adesanya does deserve it. You got Robert Whitaker, who just made his way in, and we're in a transition. We're going to see Robert Whitaker fall off here soon. Jarrett Cannonier, we saw him just get beat by Nasruddin Imavov. Marvin Vettori is probably going to get beat by God knows who, Brendan Allen maybe. Paulo Costa's on his way out. Hermansson's out. Chimaev's on his way in. Cal Barallo, Michelle Pereira, Fluffy, Chris Curtis is ranked. Like middleweight has some new people coming. It's a transition phase for it. So like at the top, man, it's hard to say because like Whitaker could lose to Ikram Aleskarov next weekend, and there's you another contender. You know, because
immediately.
that's how Du Plessis got his title shot. He beat Whitaker. You know, and that's all it takes. It seems like. So if Ikram and Du Plessis, man, that's a fight. Hamzat comes back and he fights, I don't know, Paulo Costa maybe. That's another win. That's another guy up there. So middleweight is going to have to really. You got Du Plessis, who's a new champion. I don't know if he's a long reigning champion. We got Izzy about to fight, and I think Izzy might beat Du Plessis, and then we'll have a champion versus champion match with him and Pereira. Um, but it's very much in flux right now because Strickland might want to fight somebody else. He might say, "Oh, Imavov wants to fight again. All right, I beat him once. Let's fight him," and he takes that fight. Or he might wait, and then Ikram beats Whitaker, and now he has to fight. You know, so there's so many variables to this, and it's like you really can't predict what's about to go down in this division. It's so complicated.
All right, I'm gonna bite back on one thing you said: a champ versus champ, Alex and Izzy. That is a great fight, but that's the fifth matchup we'd see between those guys. Do you think for Israel Adesanya, not that he needs to cement his legacy any further? I'm pretty sure it's as concrete as it can get. But doesn't he want that Sean Strickland fight back?
Doesn't he want to go and break the 1-1 MMA tie and get a
That's
second belt at the
true.
same
I mean,
time?
that's true. That's
What's the
true.
bigger fight? And
I think
Pereira,
Sean Strickland's the bigger fight.
you think Strickland is, even if Pereira wins next weekend or the weekend after next? Like champion versus champion, like it's written all over. Like Izzy knocked him out, the last guy to beat him. Like that's a huge fight. That is a legacy fight. He can always go back down and fight Strickland, you know. I mean, but fighting Pereira, I think that's the number one, and they're gonna go at it, I believe, one more time. Hopefully, it's champion versus champion. That would be one of the biggest fights in UFC history.
I agree with you there. That should be Allegiant Stadium. No more of this Izzy John, and we don't know who's ever going to fight at Allegiant Stadium. Alex and Izzy, Allegiant Stadium. Vegas deserves that. The world deserves that. I just think Strickland first because you always had that what if, right? There's always going to be that narrative of, well, he got you in kickboxing, you got him in MMA, and there's always going to be that what if. We'll never truly know who, we may never know who's truly better between the two. But with Strickland, you can go, you said you had an off night. Did you have an off night? You got your belt back, possibly. He's a former champ. Let him have the opportunity. That's just the here and there. But you just mentioned it. Alex Pereira stepping up, saving the day. We're gonna get to him in a second. Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler postponed. I know Eddie Alvarez did a interview with SiriusXM today, Friday, where he said, "You wait. If you're Michael Chandler, yeah, you just wait. Yeah, it may suck to sit around and wait, but he knows what that fight, the reward of having that fight against Conor McGregor is. Everybody knows it like nobody knows it like Eddie Alvarez. So, do you think we will get Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler by the end of 2024?
I I think it's about a 50-50 chance. I don't think Conor McGregor ever fights again. I don't think he wants to fight again. You know, I just it's the whole Joe Rogan. It's hard to get up and do road work when you're in satin sheets. Dude's rich, richer than anybody, and the paydays from UFC don't quite do it. The reason you see guys like Canelo and Floyd Mayweather getting out there is because they're making 20, 25 million a pop. Floyd Mayweather made $100 million against Conor McGregor. It's easy to get out of bed for $100 million. But when the UFC's like, when you're like, I've got $250 million from all of my stuff, $2 million ain't nothing for me. I can make that in a year just off of interest. I, it's like the reward for him's not quite there, and like the mismanagement of his career. I think there's like sour grapes between him and the UFC. To be honest with you, because like after the Floyd Mayweather fight, they've really mismanaged his career. He's taken a year off between almost every fight except for the Dustin Poirier fight rematch. It's just like it seems like they don't want Conor McGregor to fight, and obviously you can't have him fight in the warehouse apparently during the pandemic. But it's one of those things. Like I don't know if they'll ever fight, and if they don't, I feel bad for Michael Chandler because his career's done.
Yeah, yeah. And that was a conversation and a question I asked Jimmy Smith, who's now going back to Bellator. He said, we don't know. Yeah, Michael Chandler could have taken 3 more fights while waiting for Conor McGregor, but what would those fights outcomes have been? We don't know. So it's hard to speculate and be like, oh, he really hurt himself by holding off. All right, so I'll tell you my opinion. And in my opinion, UFC 303 for business purposes only, entertainment value, bringing in casuals, that's one thing. But to keep the line moving, to have more interest, for the interest of future fighters' futures, I think Alex Pereira, Yuri Prochaska, main event. Better business at UFC 303. Diego Lopez, Brian Ortega. Better business for the UFC and their respective divisions. A lot more than Carlos Ulberg, Jamal Hill, Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler.
Who was Hill supposed to fight even before Ulberg? Ulberg stepped up on short notice.
Who I totally forget who Jamal
I
Hill was
forget
supposed to
who it
fight.
was.
Yeah. I can look it
Anyways,
up.
regardless, like it is a better card because they're not trying to pay Conor McGregor money to all of the people on this fight card. When Conor McGregor fights, you're not getting a good fight card. But now they have to restack it. You like that to this whole thing is proof of that because they're like, oh, this card's not good anymore. We got to add Ortega versus Diego Lopez, and everybody's like, oh, that's a good fight. So it's a you're absolutely right. This is a much better fight card. Like this card here is fantastic. And let's not forget, Alex Pereira was willing to turn around and fight at UFC 301 in Brazil after winning at UFC 300. Like the dude's a madman. He'll fight tomorrow if they ask him to.
He absolutely would. And it was Khalil Roundtree. That's who Jamal Hill was supposed to fight. Yeah. 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 But listen, now that Jamal's off the card, maybe we save that. It seems like Khalil Roundtree is not going to be out for too long because of his situation. And so let's put that. I mean, give me that fight by the end of the year, and I'm happy. Carlos
Yeah.
Ulberg, Anthony Smith was added to this card, though. And I know if you watch Fight Inc., I know Hunter Campbell is, besides Dana White, the most influential person inside the UFC building. I don't know if there's anyone more significant outside of Dana White than Hunter Campbell, but do you think, and I know I'm stretching here, Blaine, but just hear me out. Do you think, way in the back of their mind, if they ever needed to, all right, Anthony, we're going to give you this fight against Carlos Ulberg. You and Alex Pereira, you call them out. He's responding to you. If you get through this young prospect, we're going to keep you ready. Stay ready if you beat Ulberg, because if Alex Pereira's opponent drops out, now we have a built-in narrative.
Yeah, I don't
I know it's a
know.
stretch. I know it's a
That
stretch.
that is, I think Yuri shows up. I really do. But you also like you got to keep in mind like Magomed Ankalaev's still out there, and he definitely deserves it. He's not going to take the shot. He's not going to pass. I think he might pass it up. Actually, I think he would pass up a fight because he wants it on full camp, which I understand. Having Alex, Anthony Smith on the card, that really is a like a backup plan. But I think they'd go with Ulberg and
No, I think so. I'm just saying for a future fight, like
oh,
if
for future, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
He
yeah.
he would have to get another win with his past record and stuff. You really can't pass up Magomed and Kalaev at this point, I don't think. But Anthony Smith would actually be a tough test for Pereira because he can actually get to the legs, and he's not greatest when it comes to taking opponents down, but he could cause some problems. He really could. But there's a line at 205, man, and there's so many permutations of that in Alex Pereira. Because like, what if Izzy comes up? Like I said, what if he
Yep,
comes up?
yep,
You're gonna
yep.
give him that fight. You're gonna give it that fight. But you got Yuri, Jamal, Blachowicz. You can run that one back, even though he's coming off of a loss. Krylov, no. Walker, no. Roundtree's, yeah, maybe Smith, but over 11th Ulberg, I'm not sure.
I
Ah,
just think that with them going back and forth, I feel like way in the back of their mind, they're like, all right, Anthony, if you get through Carlos Olberg and something in the future were to happen and we needed a short notice replacement for a Alex Pereira title fight, maybe you guys talk enough, because we don't know. Maybe Anthony Smith does upset Olberg and Alex Pereira keeps the belt. That's twice now that they've been on the same card. That's kind of how the history of the UFC has gone. The
yeah.
guys are on the same card for a couple times, and then all of a sudden they're fighting. I'm going to ask you about Alex Pereira last. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but Diego Lopez, Brian Ortega. I mean, what a fight! What are the significant stakes in your mind? How big of a fight is this for the division?
Like I mentioned earlier, you need fresh talent in because featherweight has been one of those traditionally long reigning divisions, and nobody wants to see Ilya fight Brian Ortega and watch Brian Ortega get beat up in a title fight for the third time because that's what would happen. This is a lot like an opportunity that Ikram Maleskarov has this week, and it's time to show up. You got to be here. You got to come in. It's kind of like when O'Malley fought Petr Yan. Like, hey, you got to come out and prove that you've been talking all this time, you've been performing all this time. You got to show that you are that guy. It's time to show up right now, and that's what Diego Lopez is going to get the opportunity to do because man, he's been hell on wheels against like Sadiq Yusuf and all that. His last fight's like the dude's incredible. He went tit for tat with Movsar Evloev, who's one of the top fighters in the division now. We can run that one back even though I don't want to see him run two prospects back to back in a division like this. But there's such an opportunity for Diego Lopez here, and I think he's gonna seize it. The kid is amazing. He's so good.
So good.
He's so good.
So good. Uh, Last one, I want to get you out of here, and then I'll have you plug all your work. And I appreciate you giving me your time today after all these years of going back and forth with me.
Finally.
Man, there's something about the age of Ronda Rousey captivated an audience because she was doing it for women. Trendsetter, right? She broke barriers that we hadn't seen before. John Jones, the youngest champion ever. Then we got the social media era, right? The Conor McGregor came in, lit the world on fire. And all these other guys were still around, but none truly were transcending the UFC like those three. And now we have a guy out of Brazil who barely speaks. If he does one of these, if he does one of these, it becomes a meme all over the world. And every time the phone rings, he says yes. How special and how important is Alex Pereira to the UFC? Because he may not be the most marketable guy, but he may be the one guy in recent history, in my opinion, that doesn't need to talk to be a global superstar.
Yeah, that's hard to pass up a guy like that. But when you knock people out, eventually they start paying attention. And when you do it on such a big stage, like saving UFC 295, saving UFC 300, saving UFC 303, people were paying attention. It's the biggest stage in the world. And after a performance like he did against Jamal Hill at UFC 300, the biggest card, of course he's a star. Of course, it makes so much sense. He doesn't speak. The only thing people know that he says is chamo, which means let's go, I was told. So like I get it. Like he's insanely good. He has this beautiful left hook. He's dominated two divisions, seven straight world champion level fighters in a row from Strickland to Yuri now. Seven straight. And he's only lost one to Izzy, a flash knockout. He's incredible, and people finally are paying attention. And it doesn't hurt that Sean Strickland's been big and famous. It doesn't hurt that everybody loved Yuri Prohaska. Izzy's like people were turning on Israel Adesanya. So yeah, him coming in was just like lightning in a bottle. Is it Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey lightning in a bottle? No, but this is the new wave. This is the new star that the UFC has, and he's probably the biggest star they have right now, not named John Jones and Conor McGregor, who are on their way out, which is crazy because Pereira and Conor McGregor are the same age. They're both 36.
I know, it's so crazy.
Wow.
It's so crazy. Well, Blaine, before I get you out of here and have you promote everything, all I got to say is moving forward, I'd like to do more podcasts with you. Or as one global icon, Alex Pereira, would say, Chama. Let's go. Let's do more, right? Let's do more. Tell everyone watching where they can find all your work.
YouTube's my number one. Blaine Henry's The Fight Library, or you just type in Fight Library. I'm the first one that pops up. Blaine Henry TFL on X, where you can find me there and DM me, tweet at me, and all that good stuff. And then I have a newsletter so you can get everything to your inbox. The Fight Library on Substack. You can check that out there. Appreciate you having me on, though. This has been a blast. We definitely got to chama again.
Yeah, Chama. Let's do it. Let's do it. I appreciate it, Blaine. Thank you so much.
No problem, man.